Dear readers, welcome back to another episode of Whatcha Readin'. People ask me all the time, what are you reading? When you're not writing, what are you reading? And I guess what you're looking for is the expert opinion of a world-renowned comic book writer on what kind of nonsense are you reading and what do you think about it? So I will share my thoughts on a recent tome. This is another big, thick hardcover volume from the fine folks at Fantagraphics. It's called In the Days of the Rockets. And what they're doing is they're continuing their collection of Atlas comics. Atlas was Marvel before it was Marvel. Before Marvel comics hit the scene, they were called Atlas. And they produced thousands of titles: horror, war, humor, and in this volume, science fiction. A lot of westerns, too. And Fantagraphics is doing a great job of lovingly restoring and archiving these forgotten comics from the past. And Atlas did some terrific comics. A large part of my own personal comic book collection are Atlas comics from this period, particularly war and western titles. And I really didn't get into the science fiction titles because, quite frankly, they were pricey. So, um, now, these are like 1952, 1953, and it was at a time when space heroes were taking over kids' imagination. Um, kids that had previously loved the Saturday matinee cowboy stars started to want to see things like Tom Corbett's Space Cadet and watch reruns of old Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers serials on the boob tube. And there's quite a craze with toys and T-shirts and lunchboxes and all the other merch coming along with it. It was quite a bit of a space hero boom in the early 50s. And the good folks at Atlas decided to cash in on this with a variety of different titles. Atlas was very much a redundant publishing effort. Whatever was popular, they glommed onto, and they milked it until it wasn't popular anymore. And collected in this volume are the complete runs of both Speed Carter Spaceman and Space Squadron, featuring the adventures of Jet Dixon, no relation. And the highlight of this big, thick volume, it's like over 300 pages collecting every issue of these series. The highlight for me are the Speed Carter stories drawn by Joe Maneely. The Jet Dixon stories drawn by George Tuska aren't quite as impressive, and they're not as well written as the Speed Carter stories. The Speed Carter stories by Joe Maneely and later George Tuska would draw some, and Bob Forgione would draw some. But the bulk of the series is Joe Maneely, who was kind of the go-to guy at Atlas Comics. He worked in every genre and excelled in every genre. And these are really fun stories. They're all written by Hank Chapman, prolific writer at both Atlas and primarily at DC. He wrote war comics. And always a good time. Hank Chapman knew how to tell a story, and he knew how to get a story up and running, up off the blocks. And what's interesting about these Speed Carter stories, well, one of the things that's interesting is they all open on action. There's no build up, there's no intro. Speed and his pals are just thrown right into the deep end of the pool from panel one. They're captured by robots or fighting aliens, or the gal pals being abducted by winged weirdos. And the difference between Speed Carter and a lot of the other more juvenile space heroes is Speed Carter's got hormones. He's real interested in his girlfriend. And he's a tough guy. He's a tough, Yankee know-how, red-blooded American dude out in space fighting weird aliens and strange creatures and solving the mysteries of, these bizarre planets that he lands on. In any case, Chapman is obviously writing these very tongue-in-cheek. He's writing for a young audience, but they're also somewhat a parody of the genre. And he has a lot of fun with some really crazy scientific concepts that he throws at you. And he has a lot of fun with the dialogue. And everything is space. You just don't park your car, you space park it. Everything is space and astro and cosmo. Every action and object in the story has this modifier to remind you that it's taking place in space. And also, this is probably an editorial decision. I don't think Chapman came up with his own. That they're always reminding you in the story that it's 2075, and then always making these non sequitur references to the year 1953, which was the year in which the comics were published. And he's like, what do you think this is, 1953? I mean, why would you pick that year out of the air? And I think that was it's done so often in the stories. I think that was editorial addition. Kids will think that's cool. We're referencing the year they're alive and reading this comic book. But a lot of fun, and like I said, lovingly restored, terrific volume. And there's a bunch of extras. There's a scholarly introduction by, I forget the guy's name, but he's got a doctorate in front of his name, and he's real into Atlas comics because I've read a number of essays by him. But there's lots of extras like preliminary art and designs and shots from original artwork and things like that, primarily by Joe Maneely. Joe Maneely sadly passed away. Well, he didn't pass away, died in an accident at age 32. And it's widely accepted that the history of Marvel Comics would be quite different had Joe Maneely not died unexpectedly just before the dawn of what we know as the Marvel Age of Comics. He certainly would have been a player because he and Stan Lee had a friendship and a marvelous working relationship prior to Mr. Maneely's death. Anyway, fantastic book. Thank you, Fantagraphics. You are doing the Lord's work in archiving and bringing these obscure comics to the larger reading public. And they deserve your support, my friends. Anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I will keep reading, and I'll see you down the road.